Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. If you're anything like us, then you'll probably agree that there's something inherently unsettling about police sketches. Though part of this is undoubtedly the wildly varying accuracy when it comes to facial composites and their actual resemblance to the perpetrators they're supposed to picture, we'd argue that it's more than just that. If you ask us, part of it is that many of these sketches have a sort of uncanny valley quality to them. That is, that they resemble something that is human, but always in an imperfect way, often leaving us with a strange feeling about them that is hard to describe. We'd also argue that context plays a major role as well, because these sketches are usually released in serious situations where police have little to go on in their investigation. We are left with a mysterious crime, with this image as one of our only points of reference. Today, we wanted to take a look at two cases like this. Stories where the police sketches created to help investigators solve a crime ended up taking on a life of their own. Just a heads up, we'll be dedicating an entire video to each one of these stories, so make sure you check out the description below for the link to the second case. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here is part 1 of 2 crimes with unsettling police sketches. In June of 1960, a group of 4 Finnish teenagers set out for what they likely believed would be a fun lakeside camping trip in the country's vast, scenic woodlands. However, little did they know that only one of the 4 of them would return home, sparking a decades-long terrifying search for answers that would become one of Finland's most enduring and notorious unsolved mysteries. Before we dive further into the story, we feel it's important to make a couple of notes. Though there are discrepancies with recorded accounts to some extent in all of the true crime stories we cover, we wanted to add something of an extra disclaimer for this case, because obviously we don't speak Finnish or Swedish, the 2 languages in which almost all of the primary sources in this case were reported. As a result, we've had to rely heavily on English language sources, as well as ones that have been translated with the help of resources like Google Translate, which obviously are imperfect tools. However, we'll try to point out wherever there's information that we believe is disputed, or if there's something that we just don't know. Lastly, we apologize to any viewers from Finland if we totally mess up the pronunciation of names and locations. We've tried to look up correct pronunciations wherever possible, but again, we don't speak the language. With that out of the way, let's continue. On Saturday, June 4th, 1960, Anja Mäki and Mila Björklund, both 15 years old, set up camp with their 18-year-old boyfriends, Seppa Boisman and Niels Gustafsson. It's unclear if the teenagers had been camping for several days at this point, or if this was the first day of their trip. But what we do know is that on this particular day, the group chose to stay on the southern edge of Bodom, referred to as Lake Bodom in English. The lake was just a short drive north from the city of Espoo, located in the south of the country, and also wasn't too far from Helsinki, which made it a popular camping destination for those not looking to travel a great distance from the most populated area of the country. The 4 teenagers brought with them an assortment of personal items that they would need for the trip, but appeared to have packed lightly for the most part. After all, the trip was supposed to be about spending time in the outdoors, so they wouldn't need much except for some fishing gear and proper clothes for hiking. They brought a single tent for the 4 of them, possibly with the intention of squeezing in all together, or simply assuming that some of them would spend the trip sleeping under the stars. Apparently, it was warm that day, even for June. Gustafsson and Boisman also brought their motorcycles with them, though it's unclear if these were the vehicles the group traveled on to get to Lake Bodom. While we don't have too much detailed information about what happened at the teens' campsite that day, It appears that nothing out of the ordinary occurred for most of the afternoon and evening. It wasn't until the following morning that the campsite's horrors would be revealed. At approximately 6 a.m. on June 5th, a group of boys who were bird watching in the area noticed a collapsed tent near the shore of the lake, as well as a blond man who appeared to be walking away from it. However, because they were some distance away and didn't have any reason to be suspicious, they didn't immediately believe that there was any cause for alarm and went on their way. Everything abruptly changed approximately 5 hours later when a man named Esko Johansson stumbled across the actual campsite, or more accurately, what was left of it. He left the area in a hurry and immediately contacted police, who arrived about an hour later. When police got to the teens' campsite, a grisly scene awaited them. 3 of the teens had been brutally murdered, while the 4th appeared to be suffering from serious injuries. Though descriptions vary of the crime scene, most sources agree about the injuries and locations of the 3 deceased victims: Anja Mäki, Mila Bjorklund, and Seppa Boisman. All 3 had died from stab wounds, as well as blunt force injuries thought to be inflicted with a second weapon, possibly a rock. Boisman and Mäki were found inside of the collapsed tent, while Bjorklund was found on top. Of the 3, Bjorklund had obviously been attacked the most savagely, as it appeared she had wounds that were inflicted after her death, and she was missing her clothes from the waist down. Though not dead, the 4th teenager, Niels Gustafsson, had also sustained serious injuries, and like Bjorklund, was found lying on top of the tent. Of all the teens, Gustafsson's injuries seemed to vary the most in how they were reported. Some sources say that he had a fractured jaw and broken facial bones, but otherwise only suffered superficial injuries, while others say that he had a severe concussion and also had serious knife wounds to his head. What all sources agree on was that he was missing his shoes. However, these weren't the only items that were missing from the campsite. Along with wallets and some clothes belonging to the teenagers, Gustafsson and Boisman's keys also appeared to have been taken. This was bizarre, since neither of their motorcycles had been stolen. Police were also unable to recover any of the murder weapons used in the crime. Based on the condition of the tent, which was found collapsed and with numerous slashes in it, police concluded that whoever had carried out the terrifying crime had cut the ropes holding it up before attacking the teenagers through the fabric of the tent with their weapons. Using 2 further clues, they were able to narrow down the likely window in which the attack took place. A diary entry written by Bjorklund said that Gustafsson and Boisman had been drunk and were up fishing at 2 a.m. Just a side note, this diary entry also refers to it being the 5th day camping at Lake Bodom, though it's unclear if Bjorklund meant that this was the 5th day of their trip, or whether she meant that it was the 5th day of the month. In either case, the diary entry, combined with the witness account from the bird watchers and the forensic evidence at the scene, allowed police to conclude that the attack had likely occurred sometime between 4 and 6 a.m. Though these vital leads certainly appeared to be a good start, the police would make some crucial errors in their immediate handling of the crime scene. The most consequential of these mistakes was their failure to cordon off the scene, allowing it to be quickly contaminated. Sure enough, as soon as police first left the scene, curious bystanders and other campers were able to walk through the area, likely unaware that they were destroying potential evidence. When police brought in soldiers to aid in an expanded search of the area for suspects and other clues, the unsecured crime scene was contaminated even further. Despite likely trampling evidence, the increased number of searchers did apparently yield a couple of interesting finds. A soft drink bottle was found bobbing in the water near the campsite, and Gustafsson's shoes were found between 500 and 800 meters south of the lake, in the woods. The soft drink bottle was processed, and some fingerprints were lifted from it. However, these were never matched to anyone, and it's entirely possible that the bottle was unrelated to the case. Gustafsson's shoes, on the other hand, would eventually prove to be enormously controversial, though we'll get into why that was a little bit later. The final item recovered from the campsite that's worth discussing here is a muddy pillowcase that was found next to the collapsed tent. The pillowcase was allegedly found rolled and tied with elastic bands, and when police examined it, they apparently found blood and semen evidence on it. However, with the technology available in the 1960s, the evidence provided little help to investigators. If investigators were hoping that they would get a more complete picture of how the murders had unfolded by talking to the lone survivor, they were sorely mistaken. When he was interviewed, Gustafsson told police that he had almost no memory of the attack, possibly due to the combination of the alcohol he had drank on the night of the attack, as well as from the injuries he had sustained. However, he was able to offer detectives a limited description of the assailant. He chillingly described him as a blonde man dressed in black, whose eyes almost seemed to be red when he was attacking them. Through the use of hypnosis, investigators were able to obtain further details from Gustafsson about the alleged killer. Because they seemed to match the description of the blonde man that the bird watchers had seen, the details were compiled into a few different composite sketches of a suspect, a couple of which would become forever associated with the Lake Bodom murders. It's not hard to understand why. The images are creepy to say the least, and come across as almost otherworldly. Unfortunately, with little more than a couple of witness accounts and a terrifying artist's rendering of the perpetrator to work with, the investigation into the Lake Bodom murders made little headway. However, this wasn't to say that no suspects ever emerged. Among all of the people that were considered in the years immediately following the murders, there are two men in particular that are worth discussing. The first was a man named Carl Valdemar Gillstrom, perhaps better known by the nickname Kiosk Man. Gillstrom got his nickname because he ran a stall close to Lake Bodom. In fact, some sources say that he lived less than a kilometer away from the murder scene. Even more alarming than his alleged proximity to the crime was Gillstrom's reputation amongst locals in the area. Apparently, he was an alcoholic who also suffered from mental health problems, and he was known to lash out violently against campers at the lake. Those sources claim that he engaged in a variety of disturbing behaviors, such as throwing rocks at people and harassing them. What's particularly chilling is that he was also apparently notorious for cutting the ropes of campers' tents so that they would collapse. According to several sources we came across, many people suggested to police that Gillstrom could be responsible for the murders, and he even apparently confessed to the crime, though it appears that investigators dismissed his confession as ramblings that could not be trusted. It's also said that Gillstrom's wife provided an alibi for him for the night of the murders, though she allegedly recanted this alibi later on. Some sources also mentioned that language barriers were a problem when interviewing Gillstrom, though it's unclear what the exact issue was there. If we had to speculate, it was likely that he spoke Swedish instead of Finnish, though that's just a guess, based on the fact that we read that there is a higher concentration of people who speak Swedish as their native language on the southern and western coasts of Finland. If you're a viewer from Finland, maybe you can clear this up for us. In any case, Gillstrom was never charged in connection with the case, and he actually died by drowning in Lake Bodom roughly 10 years after the murders. It's believed that he took his own life. Many continue to believe that he is responsible for the murders, to the point where several books have been written on the subject. Unfortunately, police never collected a sample of his DNA before his death, meaning it's unlikely he will ever be definitively connected or ruled out as a suspect using modern technology. The second suspect worth discussing here is a man named Hans Assmann. Aside from his unfortunate last name, Assmann is interesting because there also seems to be a fair amount of rumor and intrigue surrounding him. These rumors include that he was a German SS officer in World War II, and that he was also a KGB spy. Like Gillstrom, Assmann lived close to Lake Bodom, seemingly placing him in proximity to the crime scene on the night of the murders. However, there are two reasons in particular that many people believe that Assmann is responsible for the killings. The first comes from several staff working at the Helsinki Surgical Hospital, who claim that on the morning of June 6, 1960, the day after the murders, Assman arrived at the hospital seeking treatment. Though it's unclear exactly what he was seeking treatment for, it's said that his fingernails were black with dirt, and his clothes were covered in what appeared to be blood stains. He was also reportedly witnessed acting nervous and aggressive. The second, and perhaps most chilling thing about Assman, is the fact that he seems to bear an uncanny resemblance to the police sketches of the Lake Bodom murder suspect. Not only did Assman have blonde hair, but it's alleged that he cut it shortly after the sketches of the suspect were released by investigators to the public. While Assman was apparently interviewed by police in connection with the murders, they were satisfied by the alibi he provided, and amazingly, the supposed bloody clothes he was seen in at the hospital were never collected or tested. Assman was reportedly a suspect in several other killings, both before and after the ones at Lake Bodom. However, it's said that none of these accusations ever stuck. Like with Gilstrom, many people continue to believe that Assman was behind the murders, and he remained more or less the popular suspect in the minds of the general public for decades. That was until 2004. That year, the case took another wild turn when investigators announced that they had done modern-day analysis on the 1960s crime scene and had a completely new theory of the case. Much to the surprise of the public, they now said that Niels Gustafsson was responsible for the crime and that they would use his shoes to prove it. Gustafsson, who was now 63 years old, was subsequently arrested and charged with the murder of his friends. When the case went to trial in 2005, prosecutors revealed that new forensic analysis performed on Gustafsson's shoes found near the 1960 crime scene showed that they only had blood on them from the 3 victims. On this basis, they argued that he must therefore be the killer. After all, given the extent of Gustafsson's injuries, how could his own blood not also be on the shoes? Prosecutors explained this by saying that at least some of his injuries must have happened at a different time, and that these were self-inflicted. That he had committed the murders, then hidden his shoes before making his way back to the campsite. In order to explain his broken jaw and other bones, prosecutors put together what they believed were the events of June 4th, 1960. They alleged that at some point that night, Gustafsson had likely been kicked out of the group's tent, either due to drunkenness or possibly for some other fight he had had with his friends or girlfriend. The theory continued that whatever happened, it had led to a fight between Gustafsson and Boisman, and that this is how Gustafsson had gotten his initial injuries. They contended that in a rage later that morning, he had then attacked his 3 friends while they were sleeping. Prosecutors argued that Gustafsson being the killer would also explain why his girlfriend, Mila Bjorklund, seemed to have been brutally singled out during the attack. As proof of their story, prosecutors produced a witness who testified that she had also been camping at Lake Bodom on the night of June 4th, 1960. That witness claimed that at some point that night or early the next morning, Gustafsson and Boisman came to her tent and appeared to be intoxicated. She also said that at some point they had gotten into a fight. Gustafsson's defense team meanwhile argued that he couldn't possibly have committed the crime given the injuries that he had sustained. They also questioned why the witness who claimed to have seen him and Boisman fighting had waited well over 40 years to come forward with that information. Importantly, they argued that the other witnesses in the case, the bird watchers, had not thought that the person they saw walking away from the campsite that morning was Gustafsson. Finally, the defense cast doubt on the physical evidence, pointing out that very little existed, and argued that the shoes alone were insufficient to prove anything to the degree needed for a criminal conviction. At this point, you might be wondering, what about the rolled-up pillowcase? Unfortunately, we couldn't find a completely clear answer here. While it's said that the pillowcase did have DNA evidence on it, some sources allege that it had been previously tested at some point and had been inconclusive, possibly because there was more than one person's DNA present. As far as we can tell, Neither the prosecution nor the defense viewed it as reliable evidence for proving their case, and thus didn't push to have it retested before the trial with more modern technology. At the end of the trial, Gustafsson was ultimately acquitted of all charges, with the court agreeing that the evidence the prosecution had presented was inconclusive. Eventually, Gustafsson was also paid 44,000 euros for the mental suffering caused by the time that he was kept in jail. Though Gustafsson was a free man, like with both of the other suspects we discussed, there were those who remained convinced of his guilt. And that's perhaps what's simultaneously most frustrating and baffling of all about this case. Almost all of the theories we covered seem like they could be plausible, and yet justice seems like it's further away than ever. As a result, it's difficult to know what to make of the Lake Bodom murders, or the iconic police sketch that has creeped out so many people over the years. Was this person Hans Asman, the kiosk man, or perhaps an entirely different person altogether? Or was it simply the fabrication of Niels Gustafsson, trying to send investigators on a wild goose chase? While we hope that one day we'll be able to know the answers to these questions for sure, at least for right now, we're not holding our breath. On the subject of the iconic Lake Bodom police sketch, there's one final image we wanted to leave you with, both to creep you out, as well as to further deepen the mystery surrounding this case. It's an image that was reportedly taken at one of the victims' funerals. Notice anyone familiar? We thought you might. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.